Hello, class of EDUU 526. My name is Giselle Garcia. This is my journal entry number 1. After reading chapter 1 this week and learning about the 4 misconceptions about teaching ELL students, I decided to address the misconception number 1, which is exposure and immersion are the answered when teaching ELL students. I really identify with this topic because I am an ELL student myself. I came to the US when I was 11 years old, and the language was a barrier for me. Just by simply having exposure and immersion doesn't mean that a student will acquire a second language. I remember before coming to the U.S., my father tried to give us as much exposure to the English language, to get us familiarized before making the big transition move to the new country. But I really didn't feel that was enough. I still arrived here to the U.S. knowing zero words in English. Having the resource, it is very important. I do agree with that, but it is not enough for a learner to acquire a second language. Acquiring a language is far more complicated than just immersion or exposure. It takes adapted instruction to teach each specific child to learn because of the extended vocabulary and grammatical rules and definitions, especially of the English language. It is important that others understand that every language is different. Acquiring a second language is a long-term process. Research does show that children do acquire a second language at a faster rate than adults, yet that doesn't mean that it doesn't present any challenges. The chapter also mentioned how children seem to acquire second language much easier than adults because the language they use is more simpler than adults. But they also mentioned that the adults are able to acquire the language or use those other strategies that are more difficult for children. One teaching strategy that I can implement to help with exposure and immersion being the answer to teaching ELL students is to differentiate and adapt the instructional material for the ELL student. Depending on the mastery English level that they have. I think that differentiating the instruction means that it will be tailored to the students' needs. It is important that students have the exposure, but it is key that the students are provided with multiple ways of learning in order to get them engaged and be active learners. Educators sometimes have the assumption that it is complicated to differentiate, but it can be just quite simple. For example, a teacher can just provide scaffold when doing discussion questions, simply by providing extra time for the students to process their thinking, or give them a signal to let them know that the students will be asked a question. That way they can start processing, or vice versa, like have the student signal when he's ready to give an answer. They also ask us to create a visual. The visual that I created is this. So I chose to create this visual to address this because usually they think that the brain will just absorb. The brain is like a sponge, and it will just absorb by having that exposure. Yet in reality, the human brain takes more than that. All brains learn at different paces. They need time to process and think. So I think that it is important that in the classroom we address this by providing, like I mentioned, different ways that students can gain and acquire that language. That's very important. This is all that I have for this week's journal. Thank you.